everybody, welcome back for another Sewcialites 3 block tutorial. Today we're sewing up block number 6. It's called Window Seat by Brigitte Heitland of Zen Chic. I hope I said that right. I already went ahead and pulled my fabrics for this week, and then we're going to go ahead and get everything cut together. We have some different measurements. We're going to be making square and a square this week. If it's your first time doing that, make sure you give yourself a little bit of extra time. It's not hard. And you might notice I've got stuff written next to the 6-inch size as well as the 9-inch. I'm sewing the 9-inch on camera, and then I went ahead and pulled another bundle of fabric and started sewing the 6-inch blocks. I'm all caught up with these. We're going to have a little block parade at the end. Part of the reason I did this is because I wanted to try a different sewing machine with a different guide foot and see if my blocks came out the right size, too short, too big. So we're going to talk about that at the end of the video. Let's get started cutting our fabric for our 9-inch block. For this block, we're going to need a background fabric. I picked this cream with the pink print. The fabric in the center for the square in the square, I picked this really dark red print. I think that'll look good in the center. And then we've got the squares going around on the outside. 2 of each print. You can see how there's 2 blue, 2 red, 2 turquoise, 2 orange, or if you want, you can make them all different colors. Maybe you only want to use 2 colors. Maybe you want to use 8 different colors, however you want to make that. But I went ahead and I selected 4 prints, just like they have in the instructions. The first thing we're going to cut is our background fabric, and you'll notice it says 4 2 3/4 inch squares and 4 2 3/4 inch squares, because 4 of them are going to go in the corners of the block, and the other 4 are going to be used here to make this square and a square. So you're really cutting 8 2 3/4 inch squares. Let's go ahead and pull our fabric for background and cut those. We're going to need 8 2 3/4 inch squares. If you double 2 3/4, it's 5.5. I'm actually going to cut some 5.5 inch squares and then cut those down. So every 5.5 inch square will give me 4 2 3/4. It's an easier way for me to cut it. You can cut one at a time. Depending on your ruler, you may have 1/4 inch marks. This ruler right here, there's 2, there's a 1/4, 2.5, and then a 3/4. So it's pretty easy to line up with that ruler. There's also rulers that have 1/8 marks. This is called an itty bitty 1/8 square. Going to zoom in, you can see it has 1/8 marks, and it also has the 3/4 marks. That's an easy way to measure when you have to get 1/8s or 1/4s. I'll go ahead and link that below for you. I'll try and link all the rulers below for you. I'm going to use this. It's a 5.5 inch square. It's the easiest way for me to cut it. If you have the rectangle ruler, the 6.5 by 12.5, there's a 5.5 inch mark. So you could use this as well, depending on which way you flip it, however you want to read it. Here's 5.5. How about I'll cut one of each? We'll use this, and then we'll use this. So 5.5 right here, and you can see there's 5 and 6, and the half mark is in the middle. Now this edge is not completely straight, so I'm going to cut it a little bit bigger. A little hard to see the pink on my cutting board. That happens sometimes. I need to get another board. Let's go ahead and cut a 5.5 inch square. I actually already cut one, but I messed up while I was trying to film. So we're going to cut one from this edge, and I'm going to turn this upside down. That way we're working with 2 edges that aren't straight, and I can show you what I did. So you have a crooked edge and a crooked edge. 5.5, 5, 6, and then the half is in the middle. So I don't want to line it up like that, because I can see here it's straight, but here it's not. I know it's a little crooked, so we're going to make that a little bit bigger. You can see the fabric, and then make this a little bit bigger than 5.5. Here's my 5.5. That looks good. We're going to get 2 straight edges. That side, and then this side. And I'm going to gently pull. I've got a little string. Get rid of that. Set that aside. Now you know you have a straight edge here and here. So you can turn it like that. Straight edge, 5.5. And then we need to measure 5.5 along the bottom. 5.5, 5, 6, with the half in between, just like that. Now I have 5.5 and 5.5. And just for fun, let's grab this 5.5 inch ruler. Looks good. Now remember, I don't need a 5.5 inch square. What I need are 2 3/4 inch squares. If this is the ruler you have, I would turn it this way so you're seeing the whole numbers. 1, 2, 3. Here's 2, 2.5, 2 3/4 is going to be this line right here. Not the little tiny line, but the larger line. So we're going to go 2 3/4. And if you're not sure if you have more than one ruler, line up another ruler. Got more than one ruler, and I can see 1, 2. It's hard to see the 3/4 line on here. It's actually white on this ruler because it's the center of the ruler. So 2 3/4. I'm good. Both are the right measurement. We'll cut that. If your fabrics haven't moved, you can turn your ruler. I think mine moved, so what I'm going to do is just lay the fabrics on top of each other, or you can cut one at a time, however you want to cut it. That looks good. Looking for the 2 3/4 right there. Make sure I'm straight across the top. 3/4, 3/4, 3/4. So there's 4 2 3/4 squares. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we need 4 more. Here's the one that I cut that it got caught when I was cutting my straight edges. When I pulled the fat quarter away, I had a piece still attached and it got shifted. So let's make sure it's actually 5.5 inches, and then I don't need to cut another one. It looks like I can work with that. That looks good. I'm going to hold that. And I have my 5.5 inch ruler. Don't cut your fingers. I'm going to just turn this. It looks like my ruler still moved. Make sure it's all lined up again. That looks good. Hold that. And then I want 2 3/4. So on this ruler, you can see there's a bullseye in the middle. That's the halfway mark. So these little squares on this ruler are all 2 3/4. I'm going to use that halfway mark, 2 3/4 inch. Make sure I'm straight, top, bottom, side. You know my block's going to come out short at the end anyway. I think I've figured out why. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. I'm going to be careful. That time I don't think my fabric shifted. We'll line up the 2 3/4 over here. That looks good. And there's my other 4 squares. Now what's interesting about this is I know 4 of the squares are going to be in the corner of the block. And you can see that some of my squares have a lot of print and some have no print. So when I'm getting ready to put my block together, I'm going to look for the ones that have a lot of print and use those in the corners of my block. This one, and probably that one. Those are going to be my corners. Fabric C is our center square. We need a 5-inch square. I picked this for my fabric C. I'm going to cut it the same way. So this is a 5.5 inch ruler. You can use a bigger ruler. I'm going to look for the 5 here. Now I know that this is straight because I've cut on this before. I can see it straight. This is not. So I'm going to line up the 5 where it's straight and then bring this down. Yeah, there's more fabric here than here, so cut that a little bit larger than 5. So I have 1 straight side, and then I'm going to cut, and I'm going to have 2 more straight sides. And then I just need to cut that bottom piece. 5, 5. Make sure that's nice and straight. There's my 5-inch square. Now we need to cut our other 4 fabrics. We need 2 2 3/4 inch squares off of each of these fabrics. I think I'm going to do one at a time on this so I don't get confused. I'll cut one on camera and then I'll cut the rest off camera. Let me pull the brown. That's going to show up better on this mat. So you need 2 2 3/4 inch squares. Let's use our 6.5 by 12.5. 2 3/4 twice is 5.5. So I'm going to flip it this way. 5.5, and then I know I need 2 3/4, but this edge isn't straight. So let's cut 5.5, and it's about 2 3/4 there, and then it hits about 3 there. Let me make sure I have enough. We'll cut this piece. So you know you've got your 5.5. Now we need to get the 2 3/4. Here's 5.5. That looks good. We need 2 3/4. On this side, I have trouble using the half marks to measure the 3/4. I know that may sound weird, but I prefer to do it this way. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. I just find that easier to read. That's going to be personal preference. Get rid of that. And then I'm going to cut 2 2 3/4 inch squares, because that's what I need from each one of my prints. And they should be the same size. Looks good. I'm going to set these aside, and I'm going to do the same thing for my other 3 prints. Now I have all my little squares. I want to go ahead and lay this out before I sew it together. I'm going to lay it out like this. Brown there, and there's going to be a color, the cream, and then I'll put a brown here. Color, cream, brown. I just want to alternate so I don't accidentally end up like that with the 2 browns next to each other. And then I have pinks. I don't want to put this pink next to this pink because it's the same print. That's going to go there, that'll go there, that'll go there, and that'll go there. And these are going to be used to make our square in a square. We're going to be making everything the traditional way. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, I don't use the triangles on a roll or the foundation papers or anything like that. So we want to get our fabric B's. These are my fabric B's. Flip it over and draw a line from corner to corner. We've talked about this before, so I'll go through a little bit quicker. I'm lining it up so the corner is on a line on my mat. That helps me line up my ruler and help me draw my line straight. Line up the ruler. I am using a friction fine liner. It goes away with heat, but if you live somewhere cold, it can leave a ghost line, so never use it anywhere where you might see it. We're not going to see this line. I want to make sure it's going to be dark enough. Like that. I'm going to do the rest of my squares. I've got my fabric C, that's my center fabric, and my fabric B's. We're going to do 2 corners at a time. We'll lay down this one here and try and make sure that it's lined up here and here. And I'm going to pin over on the right hand side, so as I sew I can pull out the pins and I'm not putting them across the line where I need to sew. I'm going to use 2 today. I'm going to really see if I can get this accurate. And then let's grab the other one, line that up, line it up. And, oh, you know what I didn't do? Let's unpin. Let's fold that in half. Do I want to see this or do I want to see that? I think I'd rather see that. So I'll put that back down and then repin. And then I'll do the same thing with this. Do I want to see that or that? Ooh, I want to see that. So when that's sewn and cut off, that's what I'm going to see. I'm going to pin these. I've got these pinned, they're ready to sew. You can't do them all at once because if you lay down the next one, see how it overlaps this other square? So you can't do all 4 at the same time. You have to do 2, then trim, flip and press, and then do the other 2. Let's head over to the machine. I'm sewing on a 1955 Singer 221 featherweight. I have the regular foot on the machine that has no 1/4 inch guide. Last week I talked a little bit about this tiny bed on this machine. I actually do have the bed that wraps around and gives you more room, but I don't have the space to set that up right now. So hopefully in the future I'll be able to get that set up. I have some videos on my channel about construction, working on a new space for sewing. I'll link that below for you. That looks pretty good. We're going to sew right along that line, corner to corner. You can see I didn't even pull out the pins as I sewed. I went ahead and I left them in. I'm going to pull them out and then we're going to cut away the outside. I'm going to use the 1/4 inch line on this ruler. Line that up corner to corner, cutting a 1/4 inch away. If you're comfortable and you've got scissors, you can just use scissors and cut that off. Let's do this side. Just make sure you don't cut on the line. You have to cut about a 1/4 inch away from it. And then even though this is darker, I'm going to press it this way. Now finger pressing it, just looking, not perfectly straight. I can already tell it's not perfectly straight. It's a little short on this side and a little over on this side. Not worried about it. That side looks better. I'm going to go ahead and press those out. It actually looks really good once I pressed it on the iron. I'm ready to sew these lines. we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the pins. We'll trim off the corners and then press them at the iron, and then we'll come back and we'll check our block measurement. Everything's trimmed and pressed. You want to look at your pattern here, and depending on if you're sewing the 3, the 6, or the 9-inch, you want to measure your block. Mine should measure 5 by 5 at this point. Let's go ahead and get my 5-inch square ruler. I can do some trimming. Let me move this out of the way. I'm actually going to grab my Kimberly Cuts rotating cutting mat. It's this nice blue color. It's going to show up better. I'm glad that it's big and it's not short. It's a little bit big. I've got a little bit that I can trim pretty much all the way around, making sure that my little dot here looks like it's in the center. You can check too. There's a 2.5-inch line. Look at it top to bottom. Is it hitting the corners of your block? And your 2.5 here and here. Now my ruler is centered. Now I can carefully trim and try not to move the ruler. That's the hardest part. This is ready to go. Now we need to assemble our block. I'm going to put a little space between some of these. I'm going to do these two and these two, and then sew that as a row. And then these all be sewn together as a row, and these can all be sewn together as a row. Sewing with a 1/4-inch seam, so I'll sew these together and make a row, these two together, and then we'll have a center row, and then these four for a bottom row. And if you look at your instructions, it does give you some arrows showing you how they want you to press your pieces. You can see the corner A's, your light color, they're pressing in toward the dark. On the D's here, they have you pressing open. Personal preference if you want to press open, I always say that. Same thing here, they have these pressing open. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go sew my 3 rows, and I'll bring them back and I'll show you how I press the back of my block. Now since these are all just squares, I'm going to line them up. You can absolutely 100% pin if you want, and I need to change my foot. I'm going to use the 1/4-inch guide foot for this, and then I'm going to sew all my rows together. Here's where I am so far. I've got my 2 rows and the 2 side pieces. I went ahead and pressed per the instructions. I pressed the outside in, and I pressed this seam open. Same thing on this, and then these I pressed open. I did try pressing to one side. Normally I would press to the brown, but let me show you what happens when you do that. We're going to be putting these pieces together. By pressing open, I can see exactly where the center is, and you can line it up with the point on your block right there. When you press to the side, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to line it up and try and make that point match. So I went ahead and pressed open for these center seams. I need to do this piece here and this piece here. And I am going to pin because I want to make an effort to match this. Now, all I'm going to do is just do my best to line it up. You can kind of fold it like that. Roll it down. Looks like it's going to hit that point. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin there, down one side and up the other side, so it's catching the whole seam right here in the middle. And then theoretically everything should line up here and here if you've pinned it and all your cuts are good. Again, I've mentioned before, I really don't get caught up in trying to make sure it's perfect. I can tell this side might be a little bit short. It's going to look good in the end. Try not to worry about it. Make sure you're having fun, because if it becomes a source of frustration, you're not going to want to continue. I'll go ahead and sew with a 1/4-inch seam, and I'll press that and I'll bring it back and we'll see if everything lines up. Here's that center section. Do you see how I lost the point right here? And I lost a little bit right here. When I sewed these together, I sewed with this side up. If you sew with this side up, you can watch for your corner. See the corner right there where this thread crosses and this thread crosses? And see how my thread is inside that cross? That's why I lost that itty bitty little bit of corner right there. You'd want ideally to sew right there across that intersection, and that'll keep you from losing your points. Same thing on this side. If I would have sewed this side up, I did better here, but I'm just about a thread width off this direction. It needed to come this way a little bit. That's how you can prevent losing your corners. I didn't even think about it. I pinned it. I sewed it this side up. I should sew with this side visible so I can watch for those corners. So let's take the next part of the block and let's pin it and let's sew from the other side. Go ahead and line this up the same way, and I am going to put a pin in it. I'll go ahead and pin it, and then I'm going to flip it over. That's my parrot squawking in the background. I'll put up a picture of him. Now I'm going to pull it out, and I'm just going to repin it. So these rows I'm going to sew with this side facing up. So as I'm sewing my seam, I'm going to see that intersection right there. That intersection should be a 1/4 inch away, but I'm going to guess it's a little bit less than a 1/4 inch. Let's look. It is. See the blue through the ruler? So my seam allowance isn't perfect. If I want to hit that point, I don't want to bump my fabric right up against that guide on my guide foot. I want to sew with what they call a scant 1/4 inch. If you've never heard of that, it just means less than, like slightly less than. So if you're looking at your ruler, 1/4 inch, if you're sewing a scant 1/4 inch, an itty bitty little bit less than a 1/4 inch. That's all that means. Let's go ahead and pin the rest. So when I start sewing this seam here, I need to remember to sew a little bit less than a 1/4 inch. What you don't want to do, and what I've done before, is sew, and you realize you're going to cut the corner off. So you kind of turn the fabric, make an adjustment, don't cut the corner, and then you sort of go back. And then when you open your block and press it, it's going to be really weird. So try not to do that. Pin, and I will sew the other 2 sides, and then we'll do a comparison. This does not bother me. I'm leaving it in my block. If you do that and it bothers you, you can seam rip and redo it. It just doesn't bother me. What I'm going to do though is double check, make sure that I'm pinning this correctly. Brown, pink, pink, brown, and then I'll sew this and bring it back and we'll see how I do. I've got this sewn. Let's look at it from the back. You see my stitch line right there? Intersecting right there and right there. So I shouldn't lose these points. Let's open it up. That looks good. And let's open up this side. And that looks good. I need to take it over to the iron and press. So that's the difference, and that's one thing you can do to help make sure that you get your points, you don't accidentally cut them off. When you're sewing, don't sew from this side. Sew from the side where you can see what you're doing and when you can aim for that point. Here's the block all pressed, so you can see 2 of my points look really good. That one's the worst. This one's really not that bad. You definitely won't notice that. And this, honestly, when it's in the quilt, you're not going to notice it unless you get your face right up to it. Let's see how I did as far as being 9.5 inches. This one came out really good. In fact, I'm not going to trim anything. I might have a little bit of thread. Yeah, that came out really good. That's my best one so far. Look at that. Now I am going to go make another one in a different fabric line in the 6-inch block size, and then we're going to come back. We'll look at both blocks, and I'm going to talk a little bit about seam allowance, some things that I've figured out between 2 of my machines, and something that I ordered that I think might help. I've got my other block sewn. Are you ready? I'm sewing the 6-inch blocks with Strawberry Lemonade by Sherri and Chelsi, and I'm using Kona white as the background. This one came out pretty good. It's slightly smaller than 6 inches. Let me show you all of these blocks, and then we're going to talk about the way all of my blocks are coming out. Here's today's block. Last week we did the heart block. Here's that one. Really pretty. I wanted to do something with a little bit more of a color variation. That way I could share that with you. You have another colorway to look at and another size to look at. We had our block that had the pinwheels. You can see all my points don't match, but that's okay. The little house block, isn't that cute in all those colors? Love it. Block number 2 was the squares and the rectangle. And then our first block was actually by Chelsi of Sherri and Chelsi. That's this block right here. Something I've noticed with all of these blocks, which I'm sewing on my Juki, and I'm also using a 1/4 inch guide foot, and all of these blocks, actually with the exception of this one came out pretty dang good. They're all a little short. They're all a little small. So when I do the final measurement, these are supposed to be 6.5. They're all a little bit shorter on all 4 sides. So they're coming in the same, but just a little bit smaller. And with this one, the 9-inch, with the exception of this block, I think this is the only one so far that's come out really straight and really well done. These have all been a little short on all 4 sides. Now I'm doing my best to be accurate with all of my cuts and with my piecing, and I'm using those 1/4 inch guide feet, but they're still coming up a little bit short. So what I did was I went online and I ordered something that's another way to line up the 1/4 inch. I was hoping it was going to be here today, but it's not. So I'm going to share that with you next week. We're going to try it out and we'll see if it makes a difference. I don't really worry about all the blocks being small because they're all small. They're consistently small. So as I'm putting my quilt together, I know that they're all a little short. So they're essentially all about the same size. So we've got all of these beautiful, colorful blocks. And we have our pinks, reds, and browns. So every week from now until the end of Sewcialites 3, I'm going to continue to sew the 9-inch on camera, but then I will share my 6-inch block with you. That way you can see things in a couple of different colors and see how they turn out. The points on this came out pretty good. Since I already made one, all but one seam, I remembered to turn it and sew it from the back. I forgot on the other one. Thank you so much for joining me again for Sewcialites 3. This was block number 6. Please like, subscribe, and share. Any comments or questions, go ahead and leave them below the video. Thanks for putting up with the bird. He's really happy today and making a lot of noise. I'll be back next week with block number 7, and we're going to try out that thing to measure seam allowance. I'm really psyched to try that. I'll see you next time.